squatters get karma. The dream home. When I bought my little 2-story house, it was the proudest moment of my life. I had been saving for years, pinching every penny I could while working long shifts, living out of a modest apartment, and denying myself vacations. Finally, I had the keys to something that was mine. The neighborhood was quiet. The backyard had a sturdy oak tree, and I imagined hosting barbecues with friends or sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee while the sun came up. For the first year, things went smoothly. I fixed the creaky floorboards, painted the walls, and even landscaped the yard myself. But then work pulled me away. My company offered me a 6-month assignment overseas, and I couldn't pass it up. It paid well, and with the extra money, I planned to renovate the kitchen when I got back. Before I left, I made sure everything was in order. I shut off the water, double-checked the locks, and even asked a neighbor, Mrs. Green, to keep an eye on the place. She was a sweet older lady who lived across the street and promised to let me know if anything seemed off. I left feeling secure. Little did I know, when I came back, my dream home would no longer feel like mine. The flight home was long, but the excitement of sleeping in my own bed kept me going. I pulled into my driveway late in the evening, expecting peace and quiet. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The lights were on. At first, I thought maybe Mrs. Green had come in to air the place out, but then I noticed something worse. A car I didn't recognize parked in my driveway. My pulse quickened. I walked up to the door, suitcase in hand, and tried my key. It didn't fit. The lock had been changed. Confused and panicked, I knocked. A few moments later, the door opened, and a stranger stood there, a scruffy man in his 30s, wearing a stained t-shirt, staring at me like I was interrupting his evening. "Who are you?" I demanded. He smirked. "Who are you?" "I own this house," I said firmly. "Not anymore," he replied and slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned. Over the next hour, the horror unfolded. Through shouting and arguing at the door, I learned there wasn't just one man. There were 3 adults and 2 kids living inside. They had broken in shortly after I left, changed the locks, and made themselves at home. When I threatened to call the police, the man shouted back, "Go ahead. It's a civil matter. We've got rights." As much as I hated to admit it, he wasn't wrong. When the police arrived, they told me the squatters claimed tenancy rights. Because they had established residency, I couldn't just kick them out. I'd have to go through the long, painful process of eviction. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These strangers had invaded my home, and I was powerless to remove them quickly. For weeks, I scrambled, filing eviction papers, hiring a lawyer, and paying fees I hadn't budgeted for. Meanwhile, the squatters lived rent-free in the house I had worked so hard for. The injustice burned inside me. While the eviction process dragged on, I learned more about the squatters. The man who had answered the door was named Rick. He had a girlfriend, Tanya, and a friend of his, Kyle, living there too. Between the 3 of them, not one seemed to hold a steady job. I watched from across the street, staying with Mrs. Green while I sorted things out. My blood boiled as I saw them lounging on my porch, smoking and drinking. They blasted loud music late into the night. Sometimes, I'd peek through the blinds and catch sight of them tossing trash into the yard or letting their kids scribble on my freshly painted walls with markers. When I finally managed to get a court-ordered inspection, I nearly broke down. The carpets were ruined with stains. The kitchen sink was clogged with grease. They had smashed one of the upstairs windows and covered it with cardboard. My beautiful home looked like a dump, and yet they acted like they were the victims. Tanya screamed at me during the inspection, accusing me of harassing them and threatening to call a lawyer. Every part of me wanted to scream back, but I bit my tongue. The eviction was still in process. I couldn't afford to jeopardize it. But I promised myself something. Once this was over, they would regret ever setting foot in my house. It took 3 more months before the eviction was finalized. 3 months of watching my home rot while they lived rent-free. 3 months of sleepless nights, mountains of paperwork, and endless frustration. Finally, the day came. The sheriff arrived with me, and the squatters were forced out. Rick tried to act tough, cursing and shouting, but when the sheriff threatened to arrest him for disorderly conduct, he backed down. As they hauled their belongings out in trash bags, Tanya sneered at me. "Good luck fixing this dump. We did you a favor, leaving." I wanted to laugh at the irony. They had destroyed my home and thought they were doing me a favor. But I didn't react. I just smiled, because I knew something they didn't. Over the months while fighting the eviction, I had been digging. I found out that Rick and Tanya had a pattern. They had squatted in at least 2 other homes before mine. They'd leave, only to do it again somewhere else. That's when the idea formed. I couldn't stop what they did to me, but I could make sure they never did it again. The first step was gathering evidence. I documented every bit of damage they caused: photos, videos, receipts for repairs. My lawyer helped me file a civil suit against them for damages. I knew I'd probably never see a dime, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about creating a record. Then I contacted every landlord group and community page in the area. I shared my story, complete with names, photos, and the trail of destruction they'd left behind. Word spread fast. Property managers flagged their names. Landlords shared warnings. But the real revenge came when I discovered Rick had an outstanding warrant in another county. With a little digging, I tipped off the authorities. It wasn't long before he was picked up. Tanya, meanwhile, tried to squat in another property nearby. But this time, the owner had already heard about her. Within a week, she and her kids were kicked out, and child services started sniffing around after reports of neglect. As for Kyle, he ended up sleeping in his car after no one would rent to him. They had spent years exploiting the system, thinking they could live off other people's hard work. Now, their reputations were ruined, their options gone, and the law closing in. It took months to repair my house, but slowly, I restored it. Fresh paint covered the graffiti. New carpets replaced the ruined ones. The broken window was fixed, and the yard cleaned up. Every nail I hammered, every brushstroke I painted, filled me with a quiet satisfaction. Not just because I was reclaiming my home, but because I knew the squatters were out there, facing the consequences of their actions. I'll never forget the day Mrs. Green came over with cookies and told me she had seen Tanya trying to argue with another landlord down the street. He told her to leave before he even called the police. She chuckled. Words gotten around. That was when I realized they could never pull the same trick again. Their days of freeloading were over. Looking back, it was one of the hardest experiences of my life. Losing my home for months, watching it be destroyed, feeling powerless. That kind of anger doesn't go away easily. But in the end, I got my revenge. Not through violence or threats, but by turning their own actions against them. They had spent years taking from others, never thinking about the consequences. Now, everywhere they went, those consequences followed. And me? I still sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. My home is mine again. And I smile, knowing that the squatters who thought they could take it from me finally got the karma they deserved. Like and subscribe. Share if this happened to you or someone you know.